Still with Israel, we can't get off of this topic, unfortunately, but Netanyahu is calling for war. This is maybe another reason to suspect that the Israelis were behind the hospital bombing in Gaza. Here's Netanyahu saying that he is finding the axis of evil and that the world needs to gather around Israel because Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran are the new Nazis. Watch this.
Hamas are the new Nazis. Hamas is ISIS, in some instances worse than ISIS. And just as the world united to defeat the Nazis, just as the world united to defeat ISIS, the world has to stand united behind Israel to defeat Hamas. This is part of an axis of evil of Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. Their goal, open goal, is to eradicate the state of Israel. The open goal of Hamas is to kill as many Jews as they could, and the only difference is they would have killed every last one of us, murdered every last one of us, if they could. They just don't have the capacity, but they murdered an extraordinary 1,300 civilians, which in American terms is like many, many, many 9/11s. So obviously we must take action to defeat Hamas and to ensure that this doesn't happen again. But this is not only our battle, it is our common battle, the battle of civilization against barbarism. And if it's not stopped here, this savagery will reach you very soon and reach the entire world.
So this was a meeting with the Germans. The chancellor, I believe, visited Israel. Let me just double check on that one. But he certainly had the German flags behind him. So yes, the Chancellor Scholz was there meeting with Netanyahu, and this is when Netanyahu was saying that the new Nazis are Hezbollah, Hamas, and Iran, and that the world needs to get together and back Israel in their battle on this. So it looks like this is increasing into a wider war. There's been attempts by Antony Blinken, who went around to all the Arab nations and also met with Netanyahu. There have been attempts to try to limit this, to keep this into just a battle between the Israelis and the Palestinians and not have this seep out into a wider war. But it looks like the rhetoric coming from Netanyahu is that this is going to turn into a wider war. The other countries are realizing this, and they're probably gearing up. That's why we're seeing a cancellation of meetings with Joe Biden with the Arab nations. The Arab nations are increasingly getting tense. This is going to be a very difficult situation for Joe Biden to try to handle when he goes over to the Middle East. He's on his way now. And it's going to be a very difficult, tenuous situation for him to try to manage. You've got Netanyahu very clearly war rhetoric saying we are facing the axis of evil. If you remember, that was when George Bush was the one to call. He said it was Iraq, Iran, and North Korea, I believe, were the axis of evil. And he said this just after the 9/11 attacks. So this is when America was ready to go to war, hyped up to go to war, very much wanting to defend our country after the 9/11 attacks. And Netanyahu's using that same phrasing and the same emotions in order to pull everyone into the war to support Israel. So this is going to be a real tenuous situation for Joe Biden. Is he going to be able to calm tensions down and prevent a wider war from breaking out in the Middle East? Interestingly, also, I just want to bring up that Zelensky requested to meet with Israel, to fly to Israel and to meet with Netanyahu at the same time as Joe Biden and Antony Blinken. And the Israelis denied that request. They were like, no, now is not the time. So it's kind of interesting. What was Zelensky going to do in Israel? Was he going to go there and say, yes, your war is important, but so is ours. Don't forget about us. Hey, we're over here. Give us money. We still need money. We're still fighting a war. I think Zelensky is certainly worried because the U.S.'s backing of Israel is much stronger than it ever has been of Ukraine. Ukraine is definitely something that in recent years, many of the U.S. establishment elite have been very much focused on, but Israel has been the tried and true so-called, quote unquote, ally of the United States. I say it like that, quote unquote, or so-called ally, because I'm not sure exactly how this alliance works. They're not in NATO, for one, so they're not actually in an alliance, in a defense pact with the United States. They do not have to commit any soldiers to the United States if we were to be attacked. There's this kind of lip service that's given saying, yeah, we will defend you and you will defend us. But Israel has never put any boots on the ground for any of the any of the wars or combat situations that the United States has been in, Afghanistan, Iraq, any of the wars in Vietnam, South Korea, Israel has not provided any troops whatsoever for those battles. So I'm not 100% certain what the alliance is, what the agreement is with the alliance, other than what I do know, which is that the U.S. pledges undying, unwavering support to Israel, and that an attack, according to Nikki Haley, on Israel is an attack on the United States, which is not true. We don't have a defense pact with Israel. That is actually stated in NATO Article 5, that an attack on one is an attack on the others. We don't have any arrangement like that with Israel. We don't have anything like that. So I'm a little confused on what the alliance is and how we are these, the strongest allies ever. And that's kind of the rhetoric we hear out of the politicians in Washington. I would just like them to produce evidence and a document of this. But the axis of evil, so it looks like we may be going into a wider war in the Middle East. This is very concerning. We do have some aircraft carriers that have been deployed to the Middle East. We do have 2,000 troops that are being deployed to the Middle East. And if Israel does get itself into an engagement, the big question is going to be all of these politicians, all of the people running for president, from RFK Jr. to Donald Trump to Nikki Haley. We already know what Nikki Haley would do. We already know what Ron DeSantis would do. They've already said war, war, war. We will back Israel. It's unclear if Donald Trump, if he were elected president, or if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was elected president. It's a little unclear. They both are definitely staunch supporters of Israel and have said, yes, Israel and the military might, but it's unclear if they would actually commit ground troops to Israel or continued, maybe naval support or air support. It's unclear what they would commit. And that is a big question that many of us have. And it's a good question that we should be asking. Certainly, though, American politicians seem to be all in for Israel. So it's a good question for somebody like Jim Jordan, who is attempting to gain the speakership gavel. Jim Jordan has been staunchly against giving money and continued aid to Ukraine and committing any sort of ground troops to that offensive, or defensive and offensive in Ukraine, both of them. No ground troops whatsoever coming from the United States. So what would he do when it comes to Israel? That is a big question many of us have, because we've seen the staunch support that our politicians have for Israel. How staunch is that support? Will we go to war for Israel? That is a big, big question. I don't think Americans would commit or be okay with going to war for Taiwan, for example. There's a lot of rhetoric around that. You've got Lindsey Graham constantly, flapping around about, we want to pick on China and go to war over Taiwan, and we must do this. And we see a lot of the rhetoric coming from politicians about Taiwan, but I'm not so certain they would ever really truly commit any ground troops. I think it'd be very similar to Ukraine, because ultimately the American people don't have an appetite for it. The American people are not going to go and fight on the ground against Russia on behalf of Ukraine. And I don't think the American people are going to commit to sending off their young men and women to Taiwan to battle China. I don't think that's in the American appetite. Israel is a question. It's a question mark. Is there an appetite there? I have to be honest with you guys. I think there is. I think there's a lot of Americans who would say yes to this. And I think that if Israel goes to war, I think we're going to see American boots on the ground. I think enough people feel like we have to protect the Jews. After World War II, this is going to be another protection very similar to that. And that was the last time the United States fought, I think, a valiant war and won. I don't think we've had any very many valiant wars since then. And so that would be kind of a return to the good old days to really, truly help a group of oppressed people. That would be the thinking. And I think there would be a big appetite for it. I'm not going to lie. So it's a bit scary. And now you've got Netanyahu calling for this wider war, saying that it's an axis of evil and that these are Nazis and that we all need to band together in order to support it. So things are getting tense. Things are getting very, very tense. And I don't think that a Republican president suddenly going into the Oval Office is going to change this that much. I don't think Joe Biden being there, or if it's a different Republican, maybe Donald Trump, because he seems to be less interested in war than all the others. And so perhaps he would be the one that says, yeah, we'll help you in some ways, but we're not going to commit any ground troops. I don't know. I would love to hear from you, though, on what you think of this. And you can email me, kim@KimIversen.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you on, if you think the U.S. would commit ground troops, whether or not you think Donald Trump would commit ground troops, or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or whoever, take your pick of president. I would love to hear from you, kim@KimIversen.com.